Oh, it's just said we've just gone live. We're just going to wait for that to catch up, and then we should be good to go. Yep, that's us. We're now live. Welcome everybody. Just give me 1 second to get my deck up. Don't worry, there's not many slides to go, and we'll be kicking off very shortly. So here you go. And if I just check with my fellow panelists, can you see my screen? Excellent. So welcome on this Wednesday evening, midway through Cyber Scotland Week, to the Cyber Scotland Connect roundtable discussion on cyber war stories, challenges and triumphs. My name's Harry McLaren. I'm going to be co-chairing this session with Federico, and we are going to be kicking off very shortly by sharing some stories from our great panelists sitting around our virtual roundtable. And I'm just going to take you through just a couple of slides just to talk a little bit about who we are and also cover our code of conduct, which is of course really important, even for virtual events. So first and foremost, who is CSC? We are a community-based organization, so we're not a business, we're not even a charity at this point. We're just a group of people that pulled our weight together to try and do something we thought was important, and that was to try and create a holistic and diverse hub for the cyber community in Scotland. We're here to pull people together, not to build walls, and we're here to facilitate and support. And part of the way we do that is by running events and trying to pull in as many people that are willing to share as possible. We're here to facilitate, and we're certainly here to encourage as much inclusion and diversity within the community as possible. Core values, we're judgment-free. This environment should be an open and honest one. We're sales and vendor neutral. We do have supporting organizations which give their time or resources to us for free, but they'll not be doing a pitch or anything like that. And absolutely zero tolerance policy to any form of bullying or harassment. Bring us on to our house rules. This is a judgment-free zone. Sometimes people will share things that are quite personal, whether that is their technical mistakes or indeed their own struggles with mental health and well-being. So if you're watching this, if you're going to contribute, please remain judgment-free as much as you can. Everyone that's sharing here has been asked to do so in as much an open and honest way as possible. People are going to be transparent where they can. Where they have to keep details from you, it's due to NDAs and customers and those reasons, but you're going to be seeing hopefully the true self and true stories that people are going to tell. And as I mentioned again, zero harassment and zero bullying. So if we see any of that in the chat, if we see any questions of those natures, those people will be banned or kicked off in the best way we can, which is one of the reasons why you'll notice that our panelists are all on Zoom and you're all watching this stream on YouTube. One of the reasons for that is just to make it really simple to police that, because you can watch us and not like us, but as long as you can't interact with the community or impact anyone else, we don't really care. We adopted the Berlin Code of Conduct. Feel free to Google it. It goes into great detail about what is and is not acceptable and what we will do for any breaches. So if there are any breaches, if you feel at risk of any of these things, please reach out to any of the Cyber Scotland Connect moderators that are listed on our website. Myself, Harry McLaren, Stu Hurst, or any of our moderators will take these things seriously and make sure things are done about them to the best of our ability. And with that out of the way, we are going to be taking questions via Slido. So please visit slido.com. The code is CSC, or use that nice friendly QR code, which is definitely not going to take you to any form of malware or dropper, I promise. We'll be policing the questions, and ones that get the most upvotes will be asked live on the stream to our panelists, to our people sharing stories. I'll be trying to keep track of the YouTube chat as well, the comments. But if you definitely want your question to be considered, do get it into Slido. That is the place for that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Fede, who's going to kick us off and share a cyber war story. Over to you, Fede.
Thank you very much, Harry.
Oh, sorry, I should point out, before you share your first story, lovely panelists, if you could do a brief introduction of yourself, we may as well do that as you go to speak, as opposed to just doing it now. So kick off, go for it.
I was going to say I'll finish it. So actually, Holly, do you want to go first?
I certainly can. So, hi, my name is Holly Grace Williams. I used to introduce myself by saying I break into computers and buildings for a living, although these days I founded a cybersecurity software company. So it's more accurate to say that I write software that breaks into computers for a living. I guess where I want to start with my cybersecurity triumph story, funny thing that happened in my experiences. One of the things I talk a lot about during these kinds of events is physical access testing, because I think it often gets forgotten about. It's seen as a cool aspect of like cybersecurity and things like that, but when it comes to defensive actions and strategy, it's often left until last. So during a penetration testing engagement working with an organization, we did a physical access assessment, break into a building, try and gain access to things that we shouldn't have. And from our point of view, it was a triumph. We did really, really well. The reason I thought this was an interesting story was because the way that it went. So for a lot of people, if they think about physical access testing, or if they think about the kind of breaking into building side of red teaming, you think about, office space and those kinds of things. Whereas in this particular story, the way that it came about was the organization run an all hands once a year. So they have so many employees that they don't get to see each other very often. They have something like 1,000 employees. Once a year, they hire out an entire hotel, get everybody together, and they do all of their security awareness training and boring things like that. And then they have a big party at the end of it, and it's very fun for everybody. And it was that we went to. So we invited ourselves to their annual all hands party. And of course, because they were out of the office and it was a little bit of a party, people's guards were down. And the event management people, they didn't know who worked there or anything like that. So gaining access to the event was very, very simple. And of course, people had all of their work things with them. It was a work event and they were doing some training courses and things like that. So there was a plethora of devices available. And at one point, we also found people were taking their ID cards off and leaving them on the tables. So we not only gained access to the event, we actually gained legitimate access to ID cards. So we could have cloned them and things like that. Or we could have also thought, well, the office is empty because everybody's at this party right now and we have legitimate ID cards. So I think I just wanted for my first story to bring that out in terms of like, how do we handle physical access testing and how do we handle all of the edge cases in terms of like, maybe it's not the office, maybe it's the data center, or it's a satellite office, or it's an event, or it's just somebody traveling somewhere or someone who's out of the office who might have a risk. But that was my triumph, breaking into an event, inviting myself to a party and stealing all of their stuff whilst I was there.
I love these events because they start really positive, like our greatest success stories. Within 20 minutes, we're going to be talking about our greatest failures because we're going to be relaxed. So I expect this to degrade quite aggressively from the high point, which is us doing awesome work, as Holly just described, to our deepest, darkest secrets that we can only confess to this group of friends and 200 strangers that are currently watching us on YouTube. Thanks for that, Holly. Mr. Marquez, if I can get an intro for you, I'll call you later for an anecdote, just for who you are, what you do.
Okie dokes. So my name is Miguel Marques. I work in Edinburgh at Comisum. I'm head of testing there. I've been doing pen testing for a couple of years now. Professionally started in 2008 in Portugal, but I moved to Scotland in 2013, and I've been here since. Eventually, I will get to be Scottish when the opportunity presents itself.
You're Scottish in your heart, my friend.
Oh,
says the Argentinian in the call.
At least in my heart, I'm Scottish, definitely. So yeah.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mackenzie. Are you actually the only true Scot in this call? I think so.
This will be the second time today. Then
you're the token Scot in a Scottish Cybersecurity Connect.
Second event today where I'm the
second event that you're a token Scot. Welcome, token Scot.
Don't be fooled by my accent. I am actually Scottish.
Oh, sorry about that. Didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, I'm true Scottish. Yeah. So, yeah.
Mr. Mackenzie, quick brief interview.
Dave Mackenzie, head of managed services at Quorum Cyber. I do incident response and security operations for a living.
Thank you for that. Basilis, would you kindly go next with an intro?
My name is Basil. I'm the manager of the Cyber Academy at Napier University. I'm also running my own business in Strathclyde Forensics. I'm doing computer forensics and working as an expert witness. I'm coming from Greece, so Scotland is my adopted country. I think I've been living here since 2004. So more or less I'm Scots now, without the accent.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hurst, I don't think you need an intro, but it'll be good to get one.
Yeah, don't let the accent fool you. I'm an army brat, so I've been all around the world, but I am indeed Scottish. Yeah, hi, Stu Hurst. I run CSC with Harry and all you awesome mods as well that help us out and contribute. Industry-wise, this is my 10th year in InfoSec. It's gone very, very quickly. In about 10 days, I'm the CISO at Trustpilot, which I'm super excited to kick off.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well done.
And Rich, do you mind giving the 10 seconds of shame?
Yeah, so in carrying on from the global situation, I'm a Dubliner, but living here in Edinburgh since God knows when. And I am head of information security at Free Agents, which is the online accounting and bookkeeping SaaS solution that is used by about 110, 120,000 customers around the UK and actually mainly around the globe. So for my sins, I've got to look after all of that and make sure that our data and everything that we do is as secure as it can be.
Actually, there's a question that just popped out in Slido that I think will be relevant to particularly you, Rich. So I'll give a quick intro. So I'm team Federico Czarowski, founder and CEO of Quorum Cyber. I will jump with a story, but I might as well just do this quick question first to get the things unlocked as well. Rich, I'll address it to you. What's the biggest challenge for app security for you?
Yeah, good question.
Easy one to start with, right?
Yeah, biggest problem. I wonder if it's somebody I know. Always one of the hardest things I think that we have up against is trying to balance the resource that we need to ensure security over product and product features. I've had the pleasure of working with online startups for the last sort of 15, 20 years in Edinburgh, and constantly you're trying to iterate, deliver product in a safe and secure manner as you can. There's quite often one person that's responsible for that, while there's a massive product team trying to turn out as many different product features as possible. So it really is a process of trying to improve all the time, trying to make those marginal gains, starting off, making sure that, you know, the processes are right, people know what they're doing, that you have to have the people, process, and technology in place. So we sort of start off, we sort of got the pillars of making sure that our developers are writing secure code, so they're well versed in like OWASP top 10, for example. We have our peer reviews, so when we have junior engineers, their code is then reviewed by somebody else more senior. That's the sort of the first step. Then we have automatic controls built in to our CI/CD pipeline. That's really, really good. There's lots of open source things out there. You don't have to spend a fortune on something like Fortify. So you can always just try doing these better and better and better. And then for us, we have the next pillar for us is protection of the application at runtime. So we also have that capability. Now that's something or a tool that's been afforded to me that I've never had in the past in the smaller companies, because they do cost. And then of course there is that sort of pen testing. So there's the ability to engage in a pen test. Quite often it's a checkbox exercise. So again, if there's things like the OWASP Z attack proxy, it's something that you can be using. It's free. You can use it all the time to be checking your the security of your application. So it's just trying to fill in as many areas around the edges as possible. You start off using, there's some great open source tools out there, so it doesn't need to cost a fortune. So that's, yeah, there's always more things to do. There's always more things to do. We've got open source dependencies. There's lots of things in the press recently about dependency confusion. Nobody wants to sort of reinvent the wheel. So yeah, we use libraries, we download gems, we download all sorts of things from the internet and hope that they're going to be good. So there's a lot of things to do, a lot of things to consider.
Supply chain management. Not that every vendor under the sun is trying to raise that flag right now whatsoever.
Correct.
But
Correct.
We're not bullying vendors either. Vendors have a job to do.
There's something there, Rich, that I just wanted to mention, which sometimes we take for granted, and that is there aren't that many industries outside of maybe the military, the police, where you are fighting active adversaries. Of course, there are adversarial relationships between nature and society, and many jobs, many jobs are hard, but few jobs have active actors working deliberately against you to undermine you, to ruin you personally, your business, in some cases your national infrastructure. And I think, like what you were saying about, you need to constantly work hard against it. It's possibly a little different than in other professions where, you might be working against other types of things that are coming up against what you're trying to achieve, but we are literally fighting against people trying to destroy what we build and undermine the controls we put in place. And sometimes, it's easy to forget that. And there's an oppressive nature to fighting against people trying to do you harm continuously. Yeah. And it's
one of the biggest problems for app security is there's no measurable metrics to say you have a problem, but you're trying to guard against something where you can't necessarily prove you have a problem. So it's really hard to go to the CEO and say, I need money to do X, Y, and Z. Well, where's your evidence? So you're an insurance sales guy these days, trying to say, we need to put something in place just because something could happen. And unfortunately, if you don't, and it does happen, which of course we all should be prepared for now, then it's too late.
And even if you put it, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen, right? Which is an even more interesting conversation. So
no silver bullet.
Completely agree. I'll jump with an anecdote, and then I'll probably ask the same question again to somebody else. See if we can pick up the thread. So I'll keep it as not answered in Slido. You can vote it out, audience, if you want to get it refloated again anytime soon. So quick anecdote for me, and less like Holly's to talk about when things went right. I didn't want to jump straight into when things went wrong. I just wanted to talk about one that I thought is interesting because it's what happens when things are awkward. And as you start going in an engagement and it starts getting more awkward, it's an interesting situation to be in. And it's not one that I find myself often in. This happened a couple of years ago. We were asked by a customer to participate in an incident response. They had suffered a breach. The breach had implicated a lot of kind of big people in the company, and particularly the CEO, and a whole bunch of data had found its way leaving the company, crawling out. So we had to go in and understand what happened, put the timeline, understand the threat actor, all the typical stuff that you do in incident response. Once we presented the report, what we didn't expect is that the CEO was fired very shortly after by the rest of the company. And when we wrote the report, before anything happened, I had highlighted to the team that something was funky. This was a report where things were lining up in a certain way and the evidence was pointing in a certain way, but everything was too simple. And if you've been around enough incidents, things are hardly simple. There's a lot of noise in an incident because you're having to clean through things that are valid behaviors that are just falling within the timeline of the incident that you're dealing with, but are weird enough that you're kind of associated them just in case. You're having these weird, really anomalies over there that are totally related to the incident, but because they're anomalies, you might not find them immediately and you kind of need to widen your scope. There's a whole lot of stuff happening during an incident. And this one was text, but it was perfect. It was just tack, 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 if this, then that, A, B, T, C, and then compromise. And it was just, okay, well, look, that's where the evidence points. There's nothing else to contradict it. There's no other. So fine, we'll commit. And we wrote the report and we put the hypothesis and we presented it. Immediately after, the CEO gets fired. And I was very, very happy that I had outlined to the team before submitting the report, this looks like an inside job. But this looks like an inside job in a weird way. This looks like an inside job from somebody trying to make somebody else look bad. Once the CEO was fired, it became very obvious to us that that incident actually had been a self-attack or the probability was that that incident had actually been a self-attack, that the customer had asked to be investigated in order to get a third party to put a piece of evidence that empowered the board to have an artifact to use against that CEO. A new CEO took over 2 weeks after, which is quite particularly quickly for a company to recruit a CEO, which further propelled the hypothesis of, I just feel being used. This is not a very comfortable situation to be in. So I'm not sure I have a moral in this story. It's one of the, in the last 10 years, one of the ones that I collected as the, that just happened. It was nice to be right, but it's one of those situations we didn't really want to be right. The incident did happen. So it was interesting that it wasn't nothing that had been pretended to happen. It did happen, but it had been particularly facilitated and activated in order to boot a CEO. So I guess the only moral is not everything is what it seems. When you're walking into one of these situations, the question that I've always been taught to ask is, who's profited from this? There's always somebody that profited from a situation. That doesn't need to be financial. There's somebody that had a good day out of this thing happening, or it wouldn't have happened. And that was one of the most awkward situations that I find myself in. So I thought I would share that one. David, you can comment who it was because you know who it was. So pretend that you don't know and move on. And on that note, there's 2 more questions. I'm going to ask for another story before we move on, because this is about war stories after all. So, Mr. Marquez, would you mind jumping in with one of your war stories before we bring up a question?
I can join. And sort of, I'll take a couple of common points with the story that you've talked about. And
it was you. I knew it.
I don't think it was me, but could have been. Anyway, this story actually is the common points in your story is something that a client wanted us to try something, and essentially I ended up using one of the CEO's publicly accessible videos to bypass some authentication that they had in place. I actually have sort of like a little video. I'm not going to disclose the CEO, okay? But just a little bit of context behind this. So this is a company that was launching a new product a couple of years ago. This is before we already had iPhones, by the way, but we still didn't have Face ID. And they were trying to launch sort of some product based on biometrics as this is the new thing, biometrics. Let's have this. So they wanted to launch this product where you could take a selfie and use that selfie as your sort of as a means to authenticate yourself to gain access to the application. So I have a quick video that I'm going to show from my phone. Okay, so I'm going to put my phone in front of the screen and see if you can try to understand what we're trying to do here. Let me see. Okay, can you see it there? Let me just press play. Oh.
It looks like you're trying to use a picture in your screen.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I'm blinking.
Low tech is the best tech.
It worked. It actually worked. Now, there's a reason why I'm using a screen there. Is because first we did this on the wall. And the guy turned back to us and say, oh, no, we're more interested in high-tech attacks. And I turned to my boss at the time and I was like, okay, fair enough. Doesn't get more high-tech than using an iMac. Let's just use the iMac and let's do that. So this is a pure example where they wanted like super advanced attacks. And well, cheap works well. For that engagement, as an example, for that engagement, we actually had someone come in and do like a 3D scan of my face to try to sort of print a 3D mask of my face. And I was like, no. Let's go really, really easy with this. Like, let me just take a picture, print it off and use it. I actually used the guy's video on YouTube because I don't know if you could see there, but the beginning of the video, it says, please blink. So I went on YouTube, managed to find a high-res video of the guy giving an interview. Obviously, he's blinking because he's talking. And I managed to register an account under his name with his picture, with his voice, obviously. Yeah, this is pre-Face ID. So that's why it worked.
I guess there's a concept there of just because something is you, like that factor of something you are, if that factor is not also private somehow, then it doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You can't forget the attribute that it has to be relatively private and that somebody can't steal it. So that's absolutely terrifying.
That engagement was an eye-opener for me in terms of biometrics and the way we've sort of the way the world has evolved that way and how people perceive biometrics as being, oh, it's the best new thing.
And have you worn like a skin suit ever since? Is that not your real face? Because you won't go online.
Oh, no, it definitely is. Unfortunately, it is.
We're expecting a Mission Impossible moment
I will leave that to for the most dramatic possible time, the most dramatic time as possible. To
take
do
your
that
face
thing,
off and you'll be Stu, and then Stu will take his face off and it'll be Fede, and we're like, oh my god.
I think there's a really important point there about security testing as well. I do the same kind of thing whenever I'm doing penetration testing, where I look to see like what is the simplest attack I can do here, and very often that leaves customers disappointed because they're like, oh, you know, we paid loads of money to get you in. We wanted you to do something like cool and ninja-like, and it's like, yeah, but it's worse that I don't have to do those things. So sometimes that's just an interesting quirk of pen testing.
I'll pick up on that because
easy
there's
stuff.
a great question actually in the panel that probably has to do with this, and we can adopt it like to mean something around this. The question is, can any of the panel share any successful failure stories with thread modeling outside of traditional security functions within the respective orgs? And I think that's the core of this, right? So that these two companies that you're mentioning there could have done excellent thread modeling against the most sophisticated APT, but they forgot that a printed face of Miguel with a piece of white paper behind it could have been. So your thread model is not the same as my thread model, which is one of the risks with thread modeling, right? It's not an ultimate truth. Thread modeling is a conversation framework for us to go in an exploration journey and detect attacks. But in order to answer that question, maybe Holly, do you want to stick, and then we can hand it over to anybody else? Any experience with, let's talk about failures. Let's go for the fun part. Any failure of thread modeling where somebody's done a lot of thread modeling and then they forgot something super basic?
Yeah, I think I can't come up with an off-the-cuff example, but I can tell you broadly something that I often see is where people, when they're thinking through threat modeling, don't think of attacker capabilities. They maybe think of threat groups that might target them and things that they might target, but don't necessarily take into account capabilities. Where I have seen this come up previously is talking about APTs as awesome and stuff, and nation-state hackers are awesome because they've got like unlimited resources and unlimited money and those kinds of things. But some of the lower skilled groups out there might not have that capability, but might just have a lot of time on their hands. And I think a lot of organizations don't think of time as being a capability.
I like it. I like it. So there's another question, but I'm going to skip it to the next speaker. Basil, do you want to go next? Now, I know for a fact, Basil, you have a hat ready as well. So I will demand that you wear the beret before you continue.
So I've got a couple of stories. The first, which was a failure at the very early stage of my career, I was to investigate a mobile phone, a Samsung, that one of the things we're using as a burner phone like now. And the solicitor who hired me asked me to recover some pictures from there. So one of the things that I learned when I was at uni is that you don't go through the device browsing manually. You know, you just connect to your tools and you extract everything from there. So I had my tool at the time. It was I don't even remember the name. Anyway, but what happened is that the tool was not recovering anything except for the contact list from the phone. I had some access at the University of Glasgow, and they had some very expensive tools, XRY and Celebrite, and which I couldn't afford at the time, obviously. And I decided to ask for access to that. I got it, used those tools, very expensive tools, the kind of things that the police is using, that the FBI is using. Nothing came up, just the phone book. I went back to the lawyer and I said, there is nothing there. And they said, no, I browsed that. I went through the pictures. I've seen the pictures. I said, you might have actually deleted what you actually, when you actually did that. He got upset, rightfully so, actually. He said, no, you must have deleted them because I saw them and I saw them before I sent you the mobile phone. So I went back to see what else I can do. And I decided to get another tool. And that tool was called Mobile Edit. And this is not a vendor thing. Okay, I'm not getting paid by them. But it was a simple tool that was used to copy your data from one mobile phone to another. When you switch from one mobile phone to another, it copies them, and reformats them for the new, if you had a BlackBerry, you want to go to an iPhone, it would transfer everything on your iPhone. The license for that cost £10. And that tool actually recovered everything I needed. Okay. And that was one of the very first lessons I learned in digital forensics. don't
Is that-
trust the tools.
Is that vendors overpriced software?
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing.
FBI is overrated in their capabilities.
Yeah, but you know, it's amazing that a tool that would cost around £10,000 could not recover it, and there was a reason behind that. Those tools are, you know, the developers are spending more time on the devices that are more likely to be used and be investigated. So like every new iPhone, every new BlackBerry at the time, and that was a kind of phone that nobody cared. Actually, it was selling for £20 at Tesco back then. No contract, not nothing. You just buy it for cash for £20 at Tesco, brand new. Okay, so nobody was investing time and effort to forensically investigate those tools. However, the ones who were actually creating a tool that was copying things from one to another, they did. And it cost £10. Okay.
The right tool for the right job. I like it.
It was the most embarrassing time of my career in forensics, when I went back and I realized that I actually had told the lawyer that he probably had already deleted everything. Yeah, got time for another one?
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Do you want to go with a no, or want to go with a question?
I can go later on. I can go later. No worries. Go someone else.
Let me do a question. So got a question with 3 votes. I think it's fair we answer that one quickly. It's a really difficult one in terms of hoof. So I'm going to pick somebody I don't like. Stu, you can take this one. How do you get a business to stop thinking that security policies are there for a box ticking exercise? You're a CISO now. You can answer this. How do you make sure that policies are not a box ticking exercise, CISO?
That's a really good
This
question.
is where you realize that your new boss has joined this and is throwing you the hard balls.
Yeah, chucking the tough ones straight away, yeah, and then can my contract.
What's the probation period? I was going to say, maybe we should go to somebody else on this one.
You know what? I've been in organizations where people have taken policies quite seriously, and then been in organizations where they are the typical tick box exercise. Let me try and reframe it a little bit, because that's quite a tough thing to actually answer.
I'll give you a lifeline from my perspective. How about we start by not making them stupid? Don't try to put a policy.
Well, yeah, they have to be relevant, obviously, but they also need to be kept properly up to date. And I don't just mean the yearly review for PCI or whatever audit you're going through. And that's very difficult to do. I mean, I've worked on kind of encryption policies before, where those things need to be kind of up to date all the time. I've seen people using GitHub actually as a way to have document kind of definition and as you step through them, so you've got the different versions of them. That's quite a funky way of doing policies these days. But yeah, how do you stop them being a tick box exercise? I'm not entirely sure that you can, really. I think that they do exist to fulfill audit for a lot of companies. Sadly, they're often out of date as soon as you've written them. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has got a better answer.
Panel, yeah, I was going to say, panel, anybody want to jump in?
I can jump in with something that has been a pain point for me recently. Part of my job involves reviewing an awful lot of organizations' security policies, and one of the things that I've noticed is nobody actually does review them. And I know this because of the number of security policies that I have read that are completely incoherent. And I would love to go to the person whose name is on for the reviewer and say, hey, you see this sentence? That's terrible English. Did you actually read this? So I think, yeah, moving them away from a box ticking exercise is at least make them coherent. Also try and think of what the purpose for that policy is. If it is not a box ticking exercise, what is it that you are trying to do? And that could take you through to how do you enforce that policy? Or it could take you through to how do you make sure that people are aware of that policy? I mean, it's awesome having a policy, but it will be nothing more than a box ticking exercise if people don't know that it's there and how to access it. I really like what Stu mentioned about using GitHub and things like that for reviewing them and for having almost like a Git blame for, actually having the evidence that somebody has worked on that policy. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it makes it collaborative there as well, where,
yeah.
If it's like a policy for devs, that they're part of that process then, so they can contribute to it and it can be reviewed. And it's not just an InfoSec team kind of saying, right, here's what we must do. It just opens it out a lot more. So that's one of the best ways I've seen done.
Yeah, we did it at GitHub at the beginning, but the non-technical audience suffered a bit, and those policies were in for them. So we ended up moving to a wiki. So it's the same concept, but it was much more accessible, and it works really, really well. I echo that.
If you want to see a really cool example of that in practice, look at GitLab and the way that they have a transparent by default policy, which says all internal documentation is public by default. You have to elect to make it not. And it means that if you read some of their documentation and you think it should be improved, you can actually raise a merge request and say, I noticed this wasn't very clear. And, they obviously have to review it. But the front end is a pretty nice UI for documentation. It's wiki-esque, but the back end is straight Git. So it just means that, you can pull all those metrics out when it comes to an audit. Well, when was the last time this was updated? You don't have to go, well, look at this piece of text that I updated yesterday that said it was updated 3 months ago. You've got that true evidence where you don't need to prove. You just kind of like, well, look, the system says this. It's roughly speaking an immutable record.
I'd love to know what the panel's views on transparent security documentation is. This is something I've been working on a lot with the startup, in terms of like policy should be public, but also like how we are securing things. An example might be how we hash user passwords, right? Some of the companies I've been working with recently are like dead against that. Like, no, you do not give away security information. But I mean, like Kirchhoff's principle, right? It should be secure regardless of whether the information is known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I know.
Go with Richard. Go.
Yeah. So free agent, we've had the same discussions internally where, we succumbed to a DDoS attack, at the beginning of January. It took us, maybe half an hour to recover, get all our tools in place. Basically, we were just hit by a level of traffic that we'd never expected before, and we didn't have resource available to do it. We recently moved into the cloud, so we were able to elastically scale, and that's really good. So I'd written a blog post about that and what we did and the measures we have in place, and it's a really difficult decision to make whether we publish that, because on the one hand, it's like, you've seen Troy Hunt and Scott Helm. It's impregnable. It's the best security ever, and so you're just painting a target on your back. That's the last thing you want. But then again, we've got so many customers, so many perhaps less technical customers, and being able to try and explain the story about the controls that we do have in place, what we did to mitigate, how we've resolved it, and all those is a really, really good story. And I think that's really important for our customers to know that, because then they're trusting that you're trying to do the best you can.
It almost feels like you have a war story about this, Rich, and you could tell a war story about a DDoS attack.
Yeah, we needed a bigger boat, but trying to explain to other people and as well peers, here are the things that have happened and here's the things that we've done, because every day is a school day. We've always got something to learn from each other. So
Stu, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, there's numerous organizations have done this quite well. Monzo have been very open and transparent about their major incidents to a very deep technical level, if that's how where you want to go with it. And it takes a bit of guts to do that. Security is always going to be a little bit tricky because of the nature of the incidents that we deal with and the sensitivity. I know people like Dropbox have been quite good. They put out white papers a good 5-6 years ago, which basically outlines their security posture. Here's how we hash passwords. Here's how we store your data. Here's what we do in certain areas. Again, that's not for every organization, but I think moving more into that realm, it also makes it easier from a third-party review. So rather than fill out those bloody spreadsheets time and time again, you say, hey, there's our white paper. It's available on our website. This is what we do. I mean, I guess you have to be at a level of maturity to be comfortable doing that, rather than a one-pager that says we don't do much.
And it's also my bias. The reason I was interested in publishing policies was because of exactly what you said. For when third-party reviews happen, it's like, oh, here's a link. They're all
exactly.
I
think that it depends also. I'm a bit more controversial sometimes, because there's this whole perception of, oh well, the security by obscurity is not security at all. And we to a certain degree, it depends on where you're applying that philosophy. At the same time, if you take it back to its roots, there's no way two competing armies would disclose each other's strategy, right? So there's a certain amount of, well, actually obscurity does help sometimes. Depends on what it is that you're trying to obscure or not disclose. I think that the axioms are very dangerous because they lead to binary thinking as opposed to conscientious decisions based on risk. So I'm not for transparency, no more than I'm for privacy. I'm for a risk-balanced conversation around each individual aspect of what you're trying to achieve. Whenever somebody puts a truism that has to be held as a paradigm of truth, I feel that there's something intrinsically broken in that thought process, because at that point you're asking for an act of faith, not an act of rational application of that concept into a situation.
Well,
I really
where
like
do
that.
we?
Preachy as hell, I recognize, but I just get really angry.
Where do we as security pros go to get the information on incidents? Well, it's generally
Ask
because
Harry.
yes, generally down the pub or in these events historically, but it's either from organizations you've been at or these kind of things, because otherwise, where else do you go for that information? So I still think we're on a bit of a journey here to share more. And I think these kind of things are really important, actually, to say, look, these are the things we've dealt with. So if off the back of these, a few people might go and check a few things tomorrow at work or whatever.
I think
is it worth me doing my AWS one? Because that's
I was going to jump in. So
let me,
do you want to jump in?
Can I just say something before, related to one of the question that you were saying about much of the security reviews being a tick box exercise? I just want to tell a story about many years ago. I wasn't in Scotland still, and I've asked my then boss authorization to tell this story. So, and I think he's actually listening, so it's going to be a good one. We're going to a different country to do a test for a major organization. We get there, one of those types of organizations that exist everywhere that are critical to the inner workings of the world. And we're there to do a security test. And we're supposed to be there for 10 days, something like that, an internal pen test. We get there, we do our tests, it was over a week. We're having our wash-up meeting, because obviously we couldn't do it when we were back home. So we're sitting in one of these rooms, like the proper old school meeting rooms with a very long table where there's like the head of audit sitting right at the head of the table. I don't know, 8 guys sitting on one side of the table and me and my boss sitting on the other side of the table, sort of getting ready to do the sort of wash up. I should note that some of the findings that we had, and not to brag, but I'm a pen tester, so I need to do that. So we managed to get domain admin within, I think, the second attempt that we tried the brute force against the AD. Like, it was literally 20 minutes because it had taken 20 minutes to run the first brute force attempt or to go over all of the users. So we're talking about like pretty bad things here. So my boss starts presenting the results, etc., etc. 10 minutes into his presentation, the head of audit falls asleep. And I don't mean falls asleep as in I close my eyes and I'm asleep. I mean falls asleep like chin to the chest level of falling asleep. My boss starts going crazy, going like, oh my God, I've never been in this situation. This is awkward AF. Then you start noticing everyone else sitting on that table realizes that that person is asleep. And they're the one we're talking to, right? They're the ones that are most interested in knowing the results. So they try to ask questions, sort of to try to gain a little bit of time, a little bit of traction there to get the person to sort of to wake up. And I think this just goes to show that most of the times, and I don't want to sort of like be super generic here, but most of the times or many times, our security engagements are checkbox exercises. We are there to try to improve stuff, but organizations most often than not are not really interested in sort of the end result of what we're getting there. It's all fine if we're here discussing the importance of sharing information, making sure that all the policies are well documented, etc., etc. However, that relies on the good faith of people within the organizations and not the organizations themselves. The organizations don't care.
I like how the 2021 university graduates are just quitting careers and moving into something else. Miguel and Marcus are still, nobody really cares about the job that you're here to do. I do listen to the point though, there's a mutual obligation, right? So we also need to make sure we're addressing the problem, not the findings. We're always talking in the reports, or it's very common to see pen testers talk about the vulnerability, but nobody addresses the real risk. And we're getting better, I think, as an industry to talk about the business risk. But if you're not making it relevant to the head of audit, no matter how many times you got AD, you failed at your mission, right? Because the mission wasn't to get IED, the domain admin. Your mission was to articulate the risks to the business and how can they mitigate it. So I'm going to be harsh on your presentation skills there. While
it wasn't me. And he's actually listening to this presentation. I know he is.
I haven't seen the question pop in. I'm waiting for a question to pop in on this, and I'm monitoring like a hawk, but I haven't seen it pop in. Stu,
you used
it was
the right
amazing.
word there, Fede, and that is business. And, we're generally speaking in cybersecurity, we're quite process orientated, input, procedure, output. And you should always be able to articulate those things within the business lens. What is the business driver or lever that is, pushing the input, or that is your input? And then what is the output contextualized to the business, and how does it cause impact? And if you can tell that story well, you're already doing better than most organizations who, still will pull out metrics, like, oh, well, we have 100 rules on our firewalls. What does that tell me? It's a vanity metric. It doesn't mean anything. Unfortunately, same with, we had 50,000 alerts this year. And I come as somebody who manages and sets up SOCs for a living, right? You've got to pick the right metrics to tell the right story to the business. And part of that's education, so they don't ask for the wrong metric, like a CISO saying, well, how many rules does the SIEM have out of the box? It's like, wrong question. As to is, prove to me how many incidents you avoided. So can't prove that. Not physically possible, but sure, let's give it a go. I'll just say 20. How's that? 20 P1s.
42.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think in the end, you're just looking for explaining why in that person's context. And it doesn't really matter whether it's a CISO or whether it's like just an IT manager or something. Is it, why is this important to you? And ultimately that's where we've been really rubbish. And we run back to like meaningless stats, and we're forever having, and just as you're saying, hey, how many rules does your SIEM have out of the box? And you're just like, right, okay, and the SLA and KPIs questions where somebody's showing you a 20-year-old SOC KPI list that makes absolutely no sense for anything and drives all the wrong behavior, and you're saying, what is important to you as a business? Why is this? So if it's a pen test, it's a vulnerability that you find in a pen test, is that this is why this is important to you as a business and as a person inside that business. And if we're not articulating that properly, that's on us.
All right, I'm gonna pull the lever here because Miguel was super effective at intercepting Stu, who wanted to jump with an AWS story, and then we spent 10 minutes not paying attention to Stu. The floor is yours. I will actually also take that as an advantage to change rooms because I'm speaking next to the room where my kids are sleeping.
No worries. Right, I've got some notes for this because so much happened during this incident that I just wanted to get it all out from my head down onto some paper. So bear with me. So as always with these things, I won't mention any names, but our previous organization of one of the many that I've been at. So basically an AWS key leakage. It's extremely popular. Happens a lot. So this incident really kicked off in two ways. The first was that a developer spotted 3 rogue EC2 instances. So I'll explain terminology as well for those that aren't in the cloud world. So EC2 servers running in cloud. So 3 of those had been spun up purely, and they'd be spotted purely by chance by a developer in that account. That's important because a raft of incidents in our world, we find out about them through other people telling you that it's happening. You don't often have the technology in place to capture it or to see some alert or somebody's coming to you to say, this is suspicious. Should I be worried? At about exactly the same time, we had our AWS technical account manager contact us on Slack to say he'd been alerted to a key exposure. Now we had no playbook for this. There was nothing to follow from a playbook point of view, but we had a good SOC, we had a good kind of standard incident process anyway, so that was all kind of kicked off, incident call, Slack channels, usual stuff. Now, we knew the key in the GitHub repo from the alert, so first steps with all incident response contained the incident, so we had the key deleted, we got the developer to delete the repo. interestingly, from the time the code was pushed to the full incident response kicking off was about 20 minutes, which for the organization I was, that's pretty good. Everybody was kind of mobilized very, very quickly. It happened at 5 o'clock on a Friday. Why is it always 5 o'clock on a Friday? That really bugs me. It's always 30 minutes before beer time, isn't it? So don't push code 30 minutes before beer time. We deleted the EC2s. They were much larger than we would normally be running anything. They were kind of as big as you can buy on AWS. So that was immediately suspicious. So we got those removed. Then I kind of got involved. Interestingly, I'd been at an organization prior to that which had a very similar incident. Now, I didn't take those playbooks with me, but I'd kind of memorized the kind of things to look out for. So immediately into that incident, I was quite new in the role as well. I had something to go with, which really helped. Also noted here that we used Git secrets as well, which is a tool that allows you to prevent pushing secrets to code. So we already had that in place. We also used the thing called truffle hog, which you can search and scan repos for high entropy strings even. Now that was fine because that was all covering corporate accounts. This was pushed to a personal repo. So I'll be interested after this chat as to see whether anyone's got any experience about how you separate pushing to corporate repos, which is quite easy to control, versus personal repos. Now, what I noticed very quickly, first thing I would naturally do is let's go into the account, let me see what's happening, try and get a sort of visual view of kind of what's going on. Found out I didn't have access to anything. I'm here doing cloud security and I don't have access to cloud accounts. So immediately go and get me read access to everything. What else did I do? So next natural step, once you're into those accounts, go and have a look at the logging, right? Incident 101. Only the CloudTrail, which is the AWS logging functionality, wasn't enabled for that account. Turned out it wasn't enabled for lots of accounts, which was pretty scary. So we couldn't see any API calls. We couldn't see anything that had happened. We're kind of blind. What we had to do there, and I'm sure this resonates for any of you that have been in major incident responses, we had to make a hell of a lot of assumptions and guess as to what we think might have happened because we just didn't have the logging to deal with it. So Cloud 101, Rich is probably well in this world as well. Get CloudTrail enabled on every account that you run and back it up somewhere. Sorry, somebody was going to jump in.
I was going to jump in there with, at some point, we need to take notes of these things because there's 3 or 4 topics that we cover here that would be a spike of a whole session for everybody to comment on best practices and advice. Sorry to cut and flow there, but you have one about SOC building, one about not choking when drinking beer. hopefully, Harry, you're okay. The other one about AWS security best practices. The other one about incident response. What are the top 3 things to do in the first critical hour of an incident? There's a lot of good stuff that I keep saying we need to capture at some point. Sorry to break in there, Stu, but on you go.
No, good point. So what we did is made a lot of assumptions. We assumed lateral movement because why would you not if you're in that account? So we had to look at things like S3, RDS, just natural parts within the AWS product suite. Again, little logging for us to be able to see anything that had actually happened, but we assumed we made those assumptions. We had to mobilize a hell of a lot of people very quickly. So lots of account owners, lots of heads of, all getting dragged into calls on Friday night. Sadly, in S3, we found production credentials for other applications. So further advice, if I can give any on these, is please don't store creds in S3 for other production applications. It was a nightmare, and we couldn't find whether they'd been compromised. We assumed that they'd been compromised, so we had to go and work to rotate them and deal with them in those apps. Now, the bit that I've got here, and this was one of the main learning curves in that company, and it actually changed the culture of the company, believe it or not. This was a development account that it happened in. It wasn't a production account. This was one of the accounts that I called the Wild West at the time, which had no controls, very little eyes on. People could just kind of do what they wanted. And I think, and this is not a wrong assumption to have if you're not a security person, but most people talk about their prod environments where the nasty stuff can happen because that's naturally where you would focus. What opened my eyes in the cloud world was it doesn't really matter because these were bots, these are automated attacks. So when we had a look at root cause, eventually when we kind of got to that was there's clearly bots crawling GitHub every second of every day, and as soon as it's finding those high entropy strings, it's running attacks against using those credentials. This is seconds. No human could have reacted quickly enough to this. Even if we'd had that alert within 10 seconds and then got into the account and started disabling things, the damage would have been done then from that point of view. So that was a real learning curve for development teams around, this isn't a human being sat at a computer trying to find something and getting lucky. These are automated scripts just running every second of every day. So what we had some actions here, and again, Fede, you're right? We could have a whole session on some of these things. We enabled CloudTrail everywhere. There had to be agreement at the very top level of the business, because that was going to be a huge cost, because we were going from nothing to tens of thousands of pounds to now start logging everything. Amazing how quickly they signed those things off during these kind of incidents. We enabled guard duty everywhere, which is AWS's kind of threat intel product, if you like. I put here, we stopped devs pushing into personal repos. We didn't do anything technically to do that. It was more around awareness. So again, it'd be worth hearing from people on thoughts around that. Developed playbooks. We got logs into Splunk, so we could start to correlate information with other places. I audited every single account that we owned, over 100 of them. It took me 2 days, not the best 2 days of my career. And then there was a whole raft of work that escalated very quickly off the back of that, fixing open buckets, permissive security groups, just general hygiene in a whole load of accounts. We also did a huge retro, which we did for big incidents anyway, and that was really powerful to get people on board. It then escalated a whole load of work on key management for over a year, so lots of automated work there. And then the last two things I've got here, right? So I've got cost. We didn't really get to an understanding of what the whole thing cost. The EC2 cost was minimal in the grand scheme of things, but it took weeks and weeks of work from a large amount of teams. We're talking maybe 30, 40 people, including very senior people in the business. I would put it in the millions. It would have certainly been over $1 million by the time you weigh up all that staffing cost to look into that, and in weeks and weeks of remedial work. So a seemingly trivial thing of pushing a key to a personal GitHub repo cost the company millions in time and effort. But on the upsides, I've got a few here, because there always is. CloudSec from that point was taken very seriously. If it wasn't before, it was after that. Huge learning curve for the whole business, not just engineers, but security as well. Cultural shift. The company became a cloud security conscious company. It made every piece of work that I did after that much easier to get through, with very little pushback. And then the whole attitude to dev versus prod changed. People understood that dev environments, even though you're not running super important applications in them, can still be privy to attacks, which can be very, very harmful. So that's kind of it. That's by far the biggest thing I have dealt with that I can talk about. There'll be another one in maybe a year that I can probably talk about once it's all dealt with. But that, in terms of impact and learning and cultural shift and things I've been involved in, that was huge.
I guess it circles back super nicely as well to what we were saying before. How do we make findings? So a big part of the idea of the cybersecurity services, like a penetration test or security risk assessments, is to be predictive, right? So that we can react or advise and guide before these things happen. That would be the ideal outcome, right? And if we were able to better connect the dots between the findings of our engagements and these stories, where we could almost roll you into the customer and say, look, we're going to present you the results of a report, but we're also going to present you somebody that can talk about how they wish they'd had this report in their hands before this event happened. And that's addressing business risk, right, in a better way. So we do need to get better. And I wish we could all share more openly the types of incidents that you're dealing with. That was absolutely awesome. Thank you, Stu. I'm going to jump in with a question. We have 4 people voting the skills one, and we have 3 people voting war stories about the SOC. Simply because it seems to be the most voted, let's go with the top one. So and I'm going to ask the panel, and then we're going to go with a SOC war story. Hopefully, Dave, I think you're the last one missing sharing a story first. So first question, where did you learn the skills that you have? Do you do training days? We would love to learn more from you. This is a big topic we address quite a lot in CSC, right? We talk about how do we share, how do the community train. We talk about different people that learn in different ways. Some of them learn doing, some of them learn by attending courses. Basil, since you work for a university, you're probably the most qualified to start here. How do you recommend somebody can start even answering this question?
That's a very interesting question. We actually addressed it today. We had a careers fair and we talked about training and certification. If you don't have the right background, you just want to start studying, the best way is to go for a degree. If you already have one degree, go for a master to specialize in what you're doing. And once you decide what you're going to do in your career, exactly the path that you're going to follow, then it's the time to actually look for certifications. There is a lot of demand for certifications from employment agencies and recruiters, and that's actually a problem. They often ask for things that they just have heard or other people have asked in the past. And I brought up an example. A few years ago, at the same time, I had 2 job interviews, which was the best and the worst job interviews I ever had in my life. The best one was by Facebook. And it wasn't through an agency or a recruiter, it was directly from Facebook. I went through 6 different interviews. I went all the way to the end. Someone else had was more qualified for the job, but it was a great experience to go all the way there. Nowhere in that process did anybody ask me about certifications at all. And then I had another one where it was for a director of digital forensics for a job in London, and a senior job, a well-paid job. And once I sent my CV and everything, they asked me for my A levels.
And how did you do, Basil? I mean,
well, I said, first of all, do you realize from my CV, from my LinkedIn profile, can you make it out how old I am? And, you know, I'm not 21, 22, where my A levels could be of relevance. You know, I've listed four university degrees. You know, why would you ever need to see my A levels? The practical problem was that my school does not exist anymore. Some other school had taken over. It was a time that all the records were analog. So if my records exist, they would be in some government warehouse that probably resembles that of, you know, the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay. And why would you ask for somebody's A levels for a director's job?
I totally agree. And I think, sorry, Harry, you're jumping in there. Go.
Mine was a joke. So, you know, which I now feel I have to, you know, say, Basil, I was now just picturing the poor hiring manager trying to find your A-level results in the Raiders of the Lost Ark and ending up with a very grisly fate. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, so I like the way you're tackling it. You scared me there at the beginning when you were, well, you need a bachelor's and a master's, and then you can look for a cert. It was like, well, that's one path, a certainly valid one, and one that a lot of people follows. But yeah. I think one of the beautiful things about this community is we've met so many people that have had so many different paths into the industry. So if the outcome of that question is really, how do we learn all this so that we can be part of the industry somehow? I would start with, there is no one path, right? And there is no, there's nothing to replicate.
I was going to get to that. For entry level and for people who want to study, there is alternative paths like graduate apprenticeships, where you start working in the industry while you are getting your degree at the same time. And there is also people who have other skills and other studies, softer skills or not technical skills that are still needed in cybersecurity. You still need people with business skills. You still need people with psychology or sociology backgrounds. You still need all that pool to create an interdisciplinary environment. You cannot just have everybody being technical.
Totally agree. Holly, you came off mute there. You want to jump in?
Less technical in my job, okay, and I'm moving away from technical things.
I just wanted to share my anxiety. If we're going to set the barriers, you have to have A levels to be in this industry. I don't have a single one.
Well, you're so good at your post-its.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, you're going out.
Stu, jump in.
Yeah, the point just been made there about it being a very personal journey for everybody as to how they've either progress through their careers or how they get into it in the first place. But I think the common theme that I've seen at almost every age level and every experience level and any route in is sort of intensely immersing yourself in what it is you're trying to do. And there's 100 different ways to learn, whether it's courses, on the job, communities, whatever it is. But there's a kind of common theme of passion and the involvement of people getting involved. But we've probably got a real mix here of people like me. I've got hires, but I don't have a degree. I don't have any real certs to speak of. And I've immersed myself in other ways, and I've got a way of learning as well. But my personal journey has been sort of moving companies and learning through those different companies, some of which have been spectacular failures, but that's how I've learned as I've gone along. So yeah, it's great to hear everybody kind of different story, because I think people can pick a little bit from each of those and get value.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's also an interesting time, right? Because the pressure at the moment for people coming into the industry is huge. When we were coming into the industry didn't even exist, right? So there was no benchmark. You didn't really get to compare yourself. I mean, 25 years ago, there wasn't, other than a couple of movies, sneakers, Robert Redford being the people to admire, which was many reasons to admire Robert Redford, but hacking was not one that you would expect to associate it. Honestly, there wasn't an industry. Now you have this show business industry around cybersecurity that presents this metaphorical line of black belts that know everything about that. It's complete bullshit, right? It is not that. It's not that god level status.
Do you think
that's building?
I'm just hacking the NSA? Okay, I hacked.
Yeah, exactly. Type fast.
Do you think that that's a dangerous thing? Because I see the same thing, and people are put on pedestals as being these kind of, holier than thou or sort of super knowledgeable. And actually, I think most of us aren't. And we're all either faking it till we make it or learning as we go along. And yeah, we've got some expertise in some areas and some skill sets. I've never quite been comfortable with this idea that there are these rock stars or whatever you want to call them. I just think there's people who've been around a little bit longer and a bit more experience.
A lot of people made a lot of money from creating that mystique of the dark arts of the hacking world that I think was very convenient for a time. But no, I agree. I think that's actually incredibly damaging, because it's making a lot of people feel unfit and not able to go into that path because, I'm not that smart. I'm not good at programming, so I definitely can't do cybersecurity. There's so many myths in this that act as filters that is embarrassing. So my advice would be just go, if you like it, just go for it. Harry, you're desperate to jump in and keep in touch.
I'm so desperate. First of all, with I think someone I'm misquoting, which is Malcolm Reynolds from Firefly, where he is basically being congratulated for being this incredible saver, and he just goes, "We're all just folk." It's like, I'm not a hero, I'm not a villain, we're all just folk. And I think the same applies. But what I was really going to mention, which was around that whole careers and skills, is for me, it fundamentally comes down to competence. And competence doesn't have certification requirements. It doesn't have degree requirements, UCAS requirements. It shouldn't have years served requirements. It comes down to fundamental competence. And however you gained that competence, you've got it. And no one should be able to take that away from you. Mm-hmm. There are many routes to it, and there are many different ways to try to demonstrate it, especially to an employer through a recruitment process. And certification is one of those processes, as is a degree, as is time served, but they're all just indicators. And for those that do any form of threat intelligence, that you don't find one IOC and go, we've definitely infected by this bad actor from China, and I know his name because I've Googled him and I'm virus total, it tells me XYZ. You've got to take multiple insights from various sources to come up with a hypothesis that is believable. And it's the same with hiring. To overanalyze it, you're just trying to get a feel for if somebody is competent or if they're not competent. And the dimensions are technical versus behavioral. Are they going to behave? Can they communicate? Do they take personal responsibility? Those kind of things versus, do you actually know how to escalate your privileges and move laterally within AD or not? And I think everything over and above that, to not obviously say that I've obviously cracked that nut, but they're just additional words. They're just additional, it's got to be this specific path, and whether it's not CompTIA or a CISP or AWS or whatever, it's like, no, it's just competence.
10 years of Azure Sentinel security experience. What do you mean?
Sorry to have an unpopular opinion, which is I don't think anyone can do any job. And what I mean, or I don't think anyone can do a particular job. What I mean by this is there are certain types of work that require well, obviously a certain set of skills, but skills you can learn. One thing that you cannot learn are personality traits and sort of like that will to do that. Like you either have that mindset or you don't. This is talking specifically as a pen tester. You either have the mindset or you don't. I do think that everyone has their place in the overall cybersecurity industry. We, as Basil was mentioning, we do need analysts. We do need business people. We do need leaders, business leaders. I myself, I like to focus a little bit more on the technical side. I am trying to make the move to a little bit of the more management side, but it is a learning process for me. But I do think that for certain roles, you either have the skills, you either have the traits or not. If you want to learn the skills, then as I think Ari was mentioning, is you do need to immerse yourself in it. Find people that either do or want to do the same thing as you, and talk to them. Learn by changing experiences. The reason why I managed to get into this industry is because when I was 16, I was in the IRC world, talking to people. I was in Mozambique in high school, talking to people in Portugal, and that's how I made my friends. That's how I got my first job, etc. In this, it wasn't that I was sort of super knowledgeable, or I knew how to hack better than everyone else. I just had sort of like a network that allowed me to get into the industry, and then it's up to you to decide how far you want to go. It's for you to extend the network, for you to be sort of like a good guy and go the extra mile where you think you need to go the extra mile, and sort of ignore other ways where you don't want to follow. I don't subscribe. I also don't have an academic degree. I did go to university for a long time, more than I'd like to admit. And I will say 10 years. I was in one of Portugal's greatest engineering universities for over 10 years, and I did not graduate. But I did learn other stuff. And I am working in the field that I love. And I do think going to the university was overall a positive experience. I don't think it's a critical one or a super required, but it was good. And I do see value there.
University of life, my friend.
Indeed.
I hate that expression. Because some people do want to go to university, and getting the degree is the end game. It's just the same as you're taking a driver's license test. Just because you passed doesn't mean you can drive really well. It just means you can drive.
And that goes straight to what Harry was saying, right? It demonstrates a thing, but it's just an attribute. It's just another metric in a collection of sensors that you should have around a person, and it shouldn't I
do think it's very important, something that Basil said about recruiters saying, oh, you need OSCP, oh, you need this, or you need that. Yes, companies are going to ask for that. They are. There's no beating about the bush here. Around the bush here. However, they're not critical. You will get there. The skills you learn, you read books. That's it. That's all you need. You look at videos on YouTube on how to do whatever, dumping hashes on a Windows 2003, and take that knowledge elsewhere. What you do need,
I'm going to put the break in 2 seconds. Yeah, finish.
Last sentence is what you do need is get the fundamentals right and get a good networking, a good network of friends and people with similar-minded interests or similar interests.
Don't go at it alone. I like it. I wonder if there was a game that had a phrase like that. So I think, again, as another subject that we keep facing quite a lot in this community whenever we have these events is the how do you learn, how do you get in, how do you get better? So I think, again, another one that we can spike out that can lead to good conversations. Probably one of the digit breakouts, for example, in the next event could be interesting. Dave, I'm conscious that you're the only one not sharing a story. No, Mr. Manusis, 1 second. I want Dave McKenzie to contribute a war story because he's the only one that hasn't contributed, and I'll come back to you after.
Sorry.
Okay, well, I'll give you one of my best parts of incident response, which was completely unexpected, was reviewing another incident response. And it wasn't a triumph for like technical or anything like that, but I ended up interviewing someone, the guy that clicked the link and then put his password in. It was the guy that was the point of entry. And we were reviewing the incident. It was like a couple of months afterwards, and it was like just a report on how did that incident response go? Was there ways that we could have learned, etc., etc. And it was delayed slightly because this guy was off and stressed for like over a month because of the impact that what had ended up happening, and a lot of money had ended up leaving the company, and it was all directly traced as him being the point of entry, essentially. And actually, it's really easy when you're doing incident response and everybody's pulse is racing and we're all doing things and we've found the open port or we've found this, to easily forget like the kind of human bit of it. And the bizarre thing was, like, I've always had you don't blame the person that clicked the link. As far as I'm concerned, we failed that person. If clicking the link caused ransomware that kills the entire company, that shouldn't happen. We failed, because everybody's going to click a link eventually. So just count it as the link will be clicked. That shouldn't matter. At most, it should kill that guy's machine. That's it. But in this particular fraud case that ended up happening, it ended up being business email compromise, interjecting into conversation, and a whole bunch of things went wrong. There was I think there was like 11 or 12 touch points that if the action had gone the other way, the entire fraud fell to pieces. But they didn't. They just kept lining up and they kept lining up and kept lining up, and at the end, hundreds of thousands of pounds went out the door. And that person went off on, and so I was supposed to be interviewing him to say, look, what happened, when you click the link, what happened in the incident response and stuff like that, to try and grasp what was happening in incident response. And I spoke to the guy for like an hour and a half, and an hour and 15 minutes of that was actually me trying to explain to him he'd done nothing wrong, and nobody had told him this. And he was in tears like during the conversation, and I was sitting there going, and this was after him coming back after like being off for a month. And there was the incident response had happened, everybody had gone, done all the things, reports had been written, and everybody had moved on, and nobody went back and made sure that guy was okay.
That's brutal,
and it was
incredibly important.
And it was just such an eye opener to just make sure that, like, stop and take a breath. Incident response is quick paced. We've already heard that, hey, you like 10 seconds and then he's gone and stuff like that. So that when people are involved, just making sure you circle back and just make sure everything's okay. I mean, in that one, there was another human involved that failed an actual process. Reasonably sure that person was fired because we didn't get to interview them. There was and nobody was mentioning the person's name ever again, sort of thing. But it was a failure to follow the process to the letter, and instead of doing the phone call, did the email. And of course, business email compromise. Of course, the bad guy's going to reply back, yeah. Of course, that's the new bank account details. But the human impact inside incident response, when everybody that had anything to do with it, a lot of them are internal victims, and nobody did anything to go back and help that guy. Then it was utterly brutal, and it's the first time I've ever had to do one of these, a sort of incident response review, because normally I do incident response. So normally I'm at the coal face, either doing something technically or managing the incident and getting you through to it's contained right now, what are the next actions, all these sorts of things. And it was right, it's, you dip into people's lives to do incident response and then you move out, sort of thing. But then it was horrendous to realize that nobody had actually gone back to this guy and said, this is not your fault.
It's the Avenger syndrome, isn't it? I mean, it's great to save the world, but if you destroyed half of New York doing it, somebody has to clean up afterwards.
It is.
And I always found that exploration was fascinating. in the room, most of us have dealt with incidents. Have you guys developed anything around TLC for humans after incident? Have you deployed any form of support for human side of this post remediation?
One of the things that I've
The pen test
regularly
in the corner.
Yeah, one of the things that I regularly recommend customers add to their incident response plan I often find missing is considering how to feed your staff during the incident. Like that kind of welfare of just like, how do you make sure there's like food and water here? Because some of your staff are probably not going to go home for a little while. It's surprisingly often that those kinds of things aren't considered because I don't know, like I guess mentally in our head we think 90 minutes and this incident will be wrapped up, not 36 hours before I get to go to bed.
Pizza's always welcome.
I will call out my previous employer. I will call out Dave on this because one of the first things that happened when I joined 7 Elements at the time is we did have to deal with an incident with a client where we were stuck in the office for many hours. And one of the things that Dave did, which was actually great, was we had a couple of hours to kill before we could get some results back from the client, some logs back from the clients. And what Dave did was, 7 Elements was a small company at the time. I think it's still a small company now. But Dave got us all in the car. We went to Falkirk and watched a stand-up show by Dylan Moran. And then we went back and continued working. He springed for the dinner and everything.
I love that. And I remember an incident that we jumped into recently where we jumped in post kind of week 1. So you know that period after it's been hell, massive manufacturing type company. And they brought us on board to help with the containment phase 2 type stuff. And the first thing we said is, okay, we've got it, go to bed. And everybody in that room, you've given us access, you told us the systems, you gave us the inventory, you gave us the TTPs, we know what's going on. And at the moment, we're much more corpus mentis than you guys are, because you've been at this for about 4 to 5 days at least since last weekend type stuff. Go to bed. You're useless to me right now. And it can get worse. Sure, we can make tons of mistakes, but you know what? We'll respond to them better with you having had a 12-hour nap, a shower, a good meal, see your family, come back, and we'll fight this again next day. And people forget, people demand this kind of eternal presence until the thing is contained. It doesn't work like that. That's why you have teams and rotas and people that can come in and take over so that you sleep. There's no hero. If you're still for 36 hours and you're still there, there's very little value you can add unless you're fully trained for this. And that's what we exist for, right? So
that's all part of the trust and the culture that you want to try and build. And certainly one of the things that we do is make sure that there's the culture of no blame. You know, you don't want to be pointing fingers. You want to be there to support the team, the guy, the girl, whoever's made that mistake. Yeah, shit, we all make mistakes, but we've all got to put our arms around each other and get through this thing. So it's really, really important. You know, we preach the no blame game. I know it's quite a cliche, but we encourage our staff, as part of the culture, is raise an incident. If you think there's a problem, raise an incident. And I'd rather have 6 incidents a day that are meaningless than have one that goes under the covers that somebody goes, oh shit, I've done something.
6? You must have deployed SOAR.
Oh, I wish. But it's really important to keep pushing that culture and awareness to say it's not your fault. We're all in this together, and let's just work out how we can make things better.
Exactly, and it's not just that no blame culture, which not every place has still these days, but they are very powerful. I think one of the things I've tried to do, and that AWS key incident was a good example, where not just the retro of the incident and the learnings, but then presentations to engineering about the positive value that has come from that incident and all the great work that we're then going to do. So that person who made that mistake then feels, okay, I made the mistake and it led to a difficult time, but there's positive movement for the company and for everything beyond that. So it's trying to sell that a little bit as well. You're not really going to placate somebody fully when they've had a bit of a nightmare, but seeing that actually things got much better off the back of that is a good way of doing it.
2 steps for me. Next. Sorry, Rich, I was jumping in. I know I owe Basil a question. Do you want to jump in? Do you want to finish it off? Yeah. Just
finish off from Stu. You're right. People, their heckles are up in the moment. Go back to them a week later, when it's all died down, and a little thing like that saying, hey, you're right, not a problem, goes wonders to making that person feel so much better. and this is sort of outside. We talk about mental health, and there's one of the questions about, did you ever had your first incident go? Do you want to leave the business? This is slightly different, but again, it's just treating people like you want to be treated yourself.
Here. Basil, you want to jump in?
Yeah,
you had a question.
Two small things. The one building up on this one, as I said earlier, I'm moving into more non-technical stuff and wherever I can. And in the training that we developed in the Cyber Academy for cyber incident response for non-technical managers, one of the things that I keep coming back as well always is that incident response plan, you should treat it the way, the way the military is treating their plans. You need to drill, you need to practice it. You have an incident response plan that 3 years later, nobody had ever drilled. Nobody knows who is in which team. Half the people in this team have either moved to another company or to another department, or have retired or died or whatever. And something happens, you are looking to find which drawer the plan is in. Okay, and it's useless.
Also, don't keep it in your SharePoint system that might be done during your incident, right? So there's some basics here that need to be thought of. Not that we've learned this the hard way.
And I keep telling people that, look, the military is very good at a few things. They're not great at many things, but the things that they are doing good, they are doing very good. That's why in certain situations, you can only rely on the military. No government agency, no civil preparation is going to be good enough. Okay. I was saying that before the COVID, vaccinations. And I was saying the only thing that can save us at some point is if the military goes out and they start taking control of that. Okay, and what do we do now? The military is doing that.
Without being too generalist, leave it to the Greek to come up with that suggestion.
As I said, I have served at the Tanks and Cavalry Corps, so we are ready for that. The thing is, and I have to go back to what we were saying earlier and fill up on Miguel's comments. One of the problems is that you see a lot of people in the market, not only cybersecurity or in other areas as well, selling themselves as experts. And I think this is a good word to use when the right time has come. My job is an expert witness, and I never used the word expert. I was using the word consultant for years until a judge actually called me expert in his court. Okay, and I see people who just barely graduated from the first degree and they haven't worked days, and they got the first job, and all of a sudden they put on the Twitter and LinkedIn that they're expert on blockchain or this or that. And when you're dealing with someone who is actually an expert, because they will tell you, I cannot do that. Okay, and I realized that many people around, and people I think in this panel, and the people that we work with, the real experts are the ones who know where they are good, and they have no problem saying, oh no, I'm the best on this one. Okay, and I challenge anyone else to prove me wrong, but I cannot do that. And I've seen it not only with myself, I've seen it with many of my colleagues, and this is my standard practice as well.
I guess that's what Harry went. So Harry was talking about, it's taking ownership of what you know, but it's also knowing when to lean on the team, right? So the difference between experience and wisdom and all these things, that's what we're looking for when we're talking about aptitude and capacity. Is exactly. You don't need to have the answers. You just need to know that there's a team of people here that you can come for the answers, and we'll figure it out together.
You need to realize where your capabilities end and somebody else begin, and when is the right time to say, you know what, I need to call Fede in, I need to call Stu in. Okay.
That's Stewie? We'll call Stewie. Oh, that's sticking. that's sticking for no one. Okay, I'll jump with one question because I thought that it was related to the last one that David started. And I thought it was good for the panel. I'll keep it for the panel, and you guys can volunteer. Any war stories of broader SOC conversations that covers more than one organization? Basically, what are the pros and cons of a SOC covering more than one org at any given time? And I think, so I'll leave it to the panel. I have a couple of suggestions if we draw blanks, but anybody that can talk freely about having seen a thing in one that then turned into 10, and not a false positive, Dave.
No, don't start me a false positive. You know that's a trigger.
Go for it.
I have had multiple instances where you're either like as an IT provider or as a security provider of multiple companies, and you end up having an incident where you have essentially two different customers in the room, and it's one of your customers' fault that the other one's having the incident. And it's up to you to present the evidence.
Fatality.
So what happened? You're like,
I can only imagine legal going, let's review the MSA first.
And at that point, you're like, the evidence says that it would appear that this account did this and then this thing happened. And then the inevitable question is, well, who is that? Not your account? And you just see them turning, and you're like, you can't find a hole big enough to jump into, to be honest. You are just sitting there going, and there's nothing you can do. And to be honest, from experience, and I've had this in conversations, when I know this is coming, and I have this kind of potential conflict of customers, because the provider of something and the thing, they all know that we are the SOC for all these customers or something along these lines. It is said straight up in front of you are both customers. I will not talk about your business to you, your business to you. And if we are all in an incident together, we will play the facts, because that's all we can do. So, if you mess up and it causes that, or you mess up and it causes that, this isn't, I'm not judging, I can only ever give you the facts. And I can't play favorites. We literally will work together to fix the problem, and you guys can sort out blame later. I don't care about blame, I just care about getting the problem resolved.
So I guess we can articulate that as a pro in answering that question, right? The ability to shortcut what could have been a difficult, we'll never find out, or we'll never know how to make sure it doesn't happen again. It's shortcut by the ability to, well, actually, it was you, Mr. IT provider, not doing your MFA correctly.
So allow me to provide a con. And this is a con because of poor controls in the organization applying the change. So you notice some threat activity within one customer account, you identified it, raised an incident, etc., and you choose to take some of those IOCs that you've found during your threat hunt and apply them to multiple organizations. Now, let's fictitiously believe that at this point in time, the organization doing this as a managed service provider is quite manually driven. So very little integration of tooling, no configuration as code, no CI/CD pipeline, unit testing, etc. And so they're copying and pasting between window to window, spreadsheet to spreadsheet, email to email. And so the IOC, that is the new criteria to add into the detective controls of all customers, because you want to be proactive and protect everyone, is very human error prone. Every customer has hundreds of rules. You have tens of customers. I think you see where I'm going with this. So now imagine a night shift, a very, very tired SOC team, and people clicking edit on live rules and copying and pasting in new IOCs directly into rules, not using lookups or anything clever like that. And what you have is the con, which is you can fail very quickly and at scale when essentially you give your operators no guardrails. And so the lesson for me, having, let's say, fictitiously dealt with this situation, but yeah, it totally happened, was essentially, again, not blaming the SOC analysts who's on our 9 out of 12, day 5 out of 5, for accidentally copying and pasting into the wrong rule. In fact, you need to reflect and say, hold on, I made this mistake inevitable. And I think the same goes as security practitioners. And I love the term guardrails, and one day that will be a company's name, because guardrails is the key. It's not about no, it's not about you can't do that, because we know the business, we will just sidestep. They will get their job done in the most efficient and effective way possible. And if you're not there to simply guide them, they're just going to go around or step over you. And the same goes for a very tired security analyst. Yes, they should have triple checked, and yes, they should have probably just typed it in, and they should have cross-referenced and validated, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. We're all prone to human fatigue, and we're all cut corners and probably not test when we're pushed, especially during incidents. And so, the lesson there is, I would say, questions to ask your suppliers when it comes to the change and the brilliant, hopefully, threat hunts and constant iteration they do, is what are the guardrails that surround those changes that make human error less likely, and also make you be able to move at scale. I mean, do you know how long it takes to copy and paste SPL into 40 Splunk instances? That's RSI in a box. That's what that is. However, if you integrate that into a version control system with unit testing through pipelines and
I have lost Harry.
You put yourself on mute there, Harry.
You put yourself on mute there.
Put himself on mute.
I feel somebody with an NDA just stepped in and actually went right click.
Yeah, got cut
totally
off by
not
myself.
Dave Calder doing that. Totally not him doing that. He would
Totally
never
wasn't.
do that.
But anyway, yeah, you get the point. You got to create this guardrails. You got to make it not error. You can never engineer total human error out of the system. You got to provide guardrails for people doing change, and that includes MSPs.
Love that idea, and I love the. So we've been. It's spooky because I've been using the word guardrails a lot, at least internally with the teams, because I think it paints the right picture, which is decentralized command to make decisions, but we put protections in place so that we can contain mistakes because they're going to happen. I also quite like the idea of adding that to a supplier checklist, which is, I don't care for you to be perfect. Tell me about a time where you have made mistakes at scale, and what did you learn from them? I love that idea.
Yeah, perfect supplier question. Tell me, after you've made configuration to my production system, how fast will it be until you can revert it? And does that involve manual break glass, or can you just revert to a previous commit, click deploy, and it's fixed?
Quite like that question. So we've done one round, I think, of all war stories. There is more questions. I'm going to ask actually for a raise of hands in the panel. Do you guys want to volunteer one first? Does anybody want to go next before I ask another question? Are you keeping a good one for later in the evening? I'll take that as a no. Thanks for leaving me hanging, team. I will remember this for future ideas.
I've got one if you need it, but I'll defer.
There's plenty of questions.
There's
plenty of questions, but I feel less lonely. Thanks for that, Harry. So there's one that is generic, one that is very specific about incidents. So let's go with the generic first to create a bit of conversation. What is your view about cybersecurity and network security? Are these interchangeably used to mean the same thing? If not, what makes them distinct? I will actually enrich this one even worse, just to make things matter worse. What's on top of which concept? InfoSec on top of cybersecurity, CyberSec on top of InfoSecurity. We had this about 2 years ago, I think, in an evening with beers. We had a taxonomy at the time. I want to see whether we remember the answers or whether we come up with new ones. So I will just point at the CISO again. CISO, tell me the hierarchy here. What's InfoSec? What's CyberSec? What's NetworkSec?
Why am I getting the tough ones?
I love that you picked up the mantle, though. It's good. I just said CISO, I never said Stu, but well done.
Sorry.
You're living it up. No, good.
I know, yeah. Just felt the pressure there. God, did we come up with an answer of this at a previous?
We did.
We must have been drinking.
If Stu needs a moment
we
to
don't
think,
drink.
I'll jump in there and
Yeah,
take
jump
the
in.
easy
Go
one.
for it.
I'll take the easy one. Information security is at the top because it does not imply that a computer system is involved. So cybers and networks would be a subset of information security. I've taken the easy one. I hand it back to the panel.
Depends on what a recruiter is looking for. Because they have no idea sometimes. That's all.
I quite like it. I think last time we had decided that IT security and info security were two equivalent areas, and the appropriate modern terms grouping them all was cybersecurity. So you had policies and procedures and thinking and guidelines and risk understanding and decisions on InfoSec type land. And you had ITSec owning the controls and implementation of those policies. And then the team above that was CyberSec.
I
love that definition.
Strongly disagree with that. If I write down a secret, I can.
Well,
do
we
that
might have
without
been
a
very
computer
drunk,
system.
so it's perfectly possible to disagree.
If I write down a secret, I can do that without a computer system, and that would still fall under information security. I could print a secret, and that might involve a computer.
And do you? So let me challenge the first assumption then, just for discussion's sake. Do you think that cybersecurity has to involve a computer? Where's the one-to-one mapping into that?
I do believe that cybersecurity has to involve an electronic system.
Okay. Any disagreements? Anybody willing to go for the fight?
Sidestep computer there to electronic system because I would include.
I appreciate the art.
hardware.
The skillful art of diversion was good.
I don't disagree, but I would say that marketeers and poorly educated society has conflated different meanings. I mean, the word cyber I would typically say is almost like digital. In some form or other, it involves some form of electronic device, small or large, complex or simple. However, cyber, I mean, some people say the word crypto to mean cryptocurrency as opposed to, cryptography. It's the same kind of issue where, popular culture usage of a word doesn't necessarily mean that's what it should be used for or what it actually means.
Yeah, I've been in a strategic piece of work over the last few years around kind of first line, second line, third line, which is fairly well defined, right? So kind of first line being operational and second line kind of risk, third line audit. But there was the biggest debate was about what to call those first and second line teams. And the proposal was put that one would be IT security and the other one would be information security or something similar. And it was very, very difficult to have a similar conversation that we're having here around, well, what does that actually mean? But then what does it mean to people who aren't doing the jobs that we're doing? Is an engineering team going to understand the difference? Do we even understand the difference?
Oh, don't get me started on the term offensive security. We don't mean to offend anyone, by the way. This is a totally different misunderstanding here. Let's go back to the beginning. So
that is
how are you going to
a
start?
fair distinction, though, in terms of when talking to people in industry, I'd refer to myself as a penetration tester, but when speaking to the media, I'd say ethical hacker. Never in industry would I ever say ethical hacker, but a communication to the general public, it's easier.
Yeah, it gets complicated really quick.
Example of a word that has been totally misused, right?
Hacker, or ethical.
I have a continuing point that I raise as part of the cyber work stream for Skills Development Scotland, and that is that the Scottish Government adopted the term cyber resilience at a national level. And when talking about the national level of a government, resilience is a great word to describe things that you want to drive towards having. But then suddenly the National Occupation Standards was including cyber resilience as a requirement to try and place onto courses that had nothing to do with technology, like hairdressing or being a flight attendant. And cyber resilience they were trying to push a module that would have cyber resilience. It's kind of like you've lost your audience, because many of those people, first of all, won't necessarily understand what cyber means and definitely won't understand what resilience means. Resilience is not a common word found in the English language. Even when it is used, it's often referring to mental resilience or emotional resilience. So cyber resilience isn't something you're going to go out and strive for outside of very specific circles. Call it digital health and safety, call it something that people can relate to and actually go, oh, that sounds reasonable, because I now know that it's bad to do this thing with my physical body. Now my digital persona or identity should also have some safety things. Okay. And it's like branding 101. Who are the personas you're targeting and what language do they relate to?
Agreed. There's a couple of things. There's a question there that I find very emotional in the link, so I want to bring it up quite quickly because I think it's an important one. And it's now also the top voted, which is, have you ever had a moment you wanted to leave the industry?
Every day.
Oh, yes. I was going to say, I think unanimously the answer would be yes. I'm happy to volunteer here. So many years ago, before I came over to the UK, so back in 2008, 2009, I actually thought about leaving everything and pursue my two passions of baking and being a yoga instructor. And the only reason I didn't is because I found the driver I understood wasn't that I didn't love the industry, was that I didn't love the team I was in. And I had confused the team I was in with the industry, simply because in Argentina, the team I was in was one of the best teams to be in, or at least that was the perception. And I very quickly learned that the problem was the room. And when you're in a room that everybody tells you is the best room to be in, it's very easy to convince yourself that you are the thing that's wrong. And what I realized was, actually, no, I was just not willing to focus on the ego part of the industry as much as everybody else that was in that room was, right? And that's the problem with being sometimes in the best room between all the brackets, that people have had to take a lot of steps in, or have had to do a lot of things to get to that room. And that doesn't necessarily always make it the best room to be in. So when I joined a very tiny startup that became Vacta, in the opposite end of the world with Nathan and a whole bunch of other people to go do some crazy stuff that we had no idea. And we first scamped our way into success and then found people like Harry, and then that continued in its own way. And it became one of the best companies in security in the UK. It was because it had nothing to do with the industry for me at that time. And it had everything to do with the people I was doing it with. So
Yeah.
one
I
of the
think
advice.
One of the things I've struggled with a little bit is, this is the most passionate industry I think I've ever seen, and I genuinely mean that. I don't encounter too many people in daily life who work in an industry that has the passion that this has, which I think when perhaps things don't go well, or you find yourself in a role that isn't what you expected, or the stresses that come with some of these things, maybe that plays a part because you're so bought into it, you're so passionate about it. This isn't just a job for most of us. It's not just a way of putting food on the table. It's kind of bigger than that. I'm not trying to sound too romantic about it, but that's what it is for a lot of us. So I think when things do go wrong, you either take it perhaps more personally than you might if it was something else. I don't know. Again, there's probably another session we could do on and these kind of things. I've certainly had moments where the difficulty, not necessarily of what's being asked of us, but just the environment. Is this worth pursuing? Are there easier ways to earn a living than dealing with some of that?
I think personally, it's an emotional roller coaster. I'm proud to do what I do. I enjoy what I do, but it scares the shit out of me because there's so much that I don't know. There's so much that can go wrong. I'm trying to help do what I can, and other people are always helping. And if somebody points something out, you go, oh, well, shit, why didn't I think of that? Or it's really difficult to cover all bases. So you sort of have to balance that. You're going to struggle. You're not going to know everything. And that's why you have to try and surround yourself with like minds, peers that hopefully are there to help you.
I do. When I said every day, I wouldn't say every day, but every other day for sure. The thing is, you do need to put your hand in your conscience and sort of you reach to a conclusion, or at least I reach a conclusion, which is, this is the place where I can do the best thing I can do. Like, this is where I add my value. Once I'm unhappy with, or once I find something else where I feel I can contribute more, I would move on to that activity. Well, I think I've heard someone says that, oh, I hate the infosec industry, but sort of I need to pay my bills. That is a reality for a lot of people, not only in infosec but every other stuff. There are people stuck in jobs they hate because you have other commitments. Some stuff is stronger than what you want to do. Fortunately, I am fortunate enough that I am doing what I like. I do enjoy the job. I don't like all of the aspects of it. Obviously, no one does, and if they tell you they do, they're lying. But it is cool. It is great. It's like I get to solve puzzles every day, literally. Like,
it's also one of the things that I think people put a trap on themselves is that they think it's a binary decision, that if you try to take a break from it, you can never come back at. And that's just simply false. You can always say, especially depending on the line of work, right? If you're doing forensics, if you're doing stuff where you get to see evidence of behaviors that some of us would think unimaginable, if you're in the same people that are in law enforcement, or the same people that are cracking the networks of the horrible things that happen online, you burn out really quickly in that line of job. So it's okay to take a break and go do something else for a year and come back. The machine is not moving so fast that you can never get back in. I think that's another myth that we need to combat. The experience that you accrue through being in different fields is actually valuable to the industry, is not a negative, is a positive. So if you're struggling because your current job and role is not fulfilling, or you loved it once and it's not doing it anymore for you, go do something else, and you can come back to it later if it turns out you are now feeling, I don't know, you find the energy to go back to do that role. On that note, I will leave you on this one. I thought it was an important question and I didn't want to abandon you. Thank you very much for holding this, guys.
Thanks, Fede.
I'll leave it to you. Bye.
Just picking up on Fede's point there, I think one of the privileges we have in this industry is that there is a vast number of roles and an ever-evolving matching of the relevant competencies that can make an individual successful, whether you're technical or non-technical, whether you are very process-orientated or very shoot from the hip, whether you want to be in blue team or red team or sort of meet in the middle and a purple team. There's so much opportunity and so many skills that are useful in so many different roles. And I think that's really great, that if you're absolutely fed up with the constant onslaught of tickets and you've done a few years in a SOC, well, upskill some of your offensive security capability and, do a summer internship in a pen testing firm and see if that's for you. Similarly, if you're more business orientated and you're a cat, apparently, get into more of a risk analyst role or, InfoSec. There's so many opportunities.
Say it, Harry. Say, I'm not a cat.
I might be a cat, Your Honor.
Yeah, I think the problem is that I moved from IT into security, and it is a different world. And from the outside, some people I don't think my in-laws know the difference. As far as they're concerned, I still just work with computers. And yes, there's an element of hey, it's got a plug in it. You must be able to make this work. It's a chainsaw. I don't know, but if you sit there going, there's such a pressure to get it right, because it's that whole, we have to get it right every single day. Bad guy only has to get it right once, and when you tend to find that people care a lot more in security. Now, I know I've worked with many great people on the IT side that care about and have a level of care. There is also an awful lot more in the IT side of people that are just there to punch in and punch out. And I don't work with any people like that anymore. Everybody I come across in InfoSec is passionate and cares, because if you don't, you would burn out really quickly. You would do 100 tickets a day for a week and then you're done, sort of thing. Whereas the passion and the caring and the wanting to make a difference, is both a blessing and a curse, because for us it keeps us in the industry, and it's also the thing that's punishing you because you care so much that it actually then physically affects you. We're not a punch in, punch out sort of industry. You just don't get that. You don't last in it, or you go nowhere. I mean, there will be people that will be a tier 1 SOC analyst for their entire life because they are happy with playbooks straight in front of them and never need to do anything. If it gets vaguely complicated, it moves on to the next. And some organizations, when they get to a certain size, need people to be happy at that level. That's very rare. The people that end up coming to events like this and end up talking and sharing their stories and stuff, they're all passionate and they all care. And that leaves you vulnerable because you care, and we can't always win. And you take on too much.
There's a dopamine hit to what we do, no doubt about it, in lots of areas. That it's not just the companies you work for and the work you do there. Us doing the community stuff and feeling like you're part of something bigger and making a bit of a difference. There's a buzz from that. There's a buzz of being part of that, but that puts added pressure on an individual as well. So I think, yeah, you're right, David. It's a combination of all those things: day-to-day pressure in a role, pressure you put on yourself, that lack of knowledge that we all have at any point in time. It's a combination of things. But you're right, it keeps dragging you back even on the days that you don't feel so good about it.
Yeah. I think there's an important line to draw there as well in terms of what you mean by the passion. I worked for a company a long time ago where one of the things that they were pushing in one of the all hands meetings was, you shouldn't come to work for the money. You should come to work because you're passionate about the job. And on one hand, whilst I do agree with that, you stop paying me, I stop turning up. You need to have that distinction between.
My bank manager says the same thing when it comes to paying my mortgage. He's like, as long as you really want it, you don't need to worry about paying it. So,
I can't buy food and pay rent with passion,
Yeah, you can try. So I'm going to say a short thing to give everyone a chance to think if they've got another short story. We are going to be shutting down soon. Just in the vein of talking about passion and talking about that there is a cost to passion and a cost to work in our industry, I just really want to highlight that, suffering from being down, burnout, struggling to maintain a good, mental well-being or emotional health is a real problem. It's a real problem for many people, especially during the lockdown, especially during the economic issues driven from the pandemic and the pandemic itself. And so just a call to action that, you know, if you are watching this stream, that reaching out really can make a difference. And that can mean reaching out to strangers that are on this panel. It can mean reaching out to the communities that you're part of, your employers, your family, your friends, but do share your burden, because there are many people that are willing to go through that journey with you. And I just think it's super important. And, you know, I'm going to harp on about this for as long as I can, and that showing some vulnerability can change your life, and it can change other people's lives by being vulnerable and just sharing a little bit about yourself. So I'm not going to harp on about it because it's not really a war story, but I'm now going to just ask, you know, are there any, you know, short war stories to close us out? I'm probably looking for no more than a couple. Any of our panelists have something prepared? I've got one if we need it.
I have one as well.
Do it.
Which I promised to the Portuguese guys watching this that I would tell, which is sort of a little bit of, it has all the sprinkles of what we were just discussing. After this incident, I legitimately thought, okay, that's me over. I will never work in this industry again. And it also has that little sprinkle of, why does everything always happen on a Friday at 5 o'clock? So back in Portugal, many years ago, we usually work longer hours in Portugal. Not longer hours. We usually get off work later, around, I don't know, maybe 6:30, something like that on a Friday. I was preparing something for a load test that I was going to be doing the following week. So I spent the afternoon trying out some load scripts that would test sort of like a Dropbox clone type of product. And I prepared all my scripts. I was sure that everything was working fine, packed up my stuff, started to leave the client. This is 6:30 on a Friday, and I get a call on my mobile from a number that I did not recognize. And I'm like, man, what's happening? Pick up the phone. The guy goes like, is this Miguel? Oh, yeah. Do you work for so-and-so? Yeah. Are you supposed to be doing a test? Sort of, are you currently doing a test on this product? Yeah. And I'm getting suspicious because I had no idea who this was. And the guy literally says, in pardon my French, stop the fuck whatever you're doing. And I'm like, I'm getting out of the building. I'm literally not doing anything. And he was like, everything, sort of all of our service is down. Even production sort of was down. Super. Everyone was panicking. I'm like, I wasn't doing anything. I was trying out my scripts to make sure that everything was working properly. Needless to say, it was a very, very hard weekend where I was thinking, okay, I really screwed up this time. And yeah, naturally, sort of the service crashed, both the testing environment that I was testing on, as well as the production. The following week, obviously, there was no load testing being done, but I was called a couple of times more to sort of go back in, try whatever I did, try it again. Yeah, I did manage to crash it a couple of more times, but it was a difficult weekend. Calling my boss, him reassuring me like, look, you've done nothing wrong. You were doing exactly what was supposed to do, or what you were supposed to do. But I was like, no, but I did it. I was the one that crashed it. So thank you to Luis for the support at the time. And I'm fairly certain some of the guys are listening to this story. They were the client that I was actually breaking.
Oh dear. Well, I'm sure you've bought them a beer since to, ask for forgiveness for that weekend.
I don't know. One of the guys still talks ill of me sometimes. I think.
And you don't want your system to be crashed. You should have defensively written your script, your APIs to cope with it.
Yeah. The thing was, it was totally unexpected. I was testing with one account, and I did not expect that I would be able to bring a service down using one single account. But hey ho, they found out it was possible.
Hashtag mad elite skills.
No, not really. Very basic ones. You saw the printed photo on the iMac. That's as far as it goes. They're good enough.
Just try to log in 3 times within a millisecond.
They're good enough.
Awesome. Right. Well, I'm going to share one real quick story, and then we're going to draw this to a close. So my story is an incident experienced by a pretty large organization, and I get called on as a kind of interim incident manager. What I really was a senior SOC analyst. And this incident is already kicked off, and it's kicked off from kind of an IT support standpoint. So it's a P1, as all of the kind of offices and satellite offices of this organization are having intermittent connectivity issues to the public internet. So I'm on, the DDoS mitigation provider is on, sharing how they are protecting them from a DDoS attack. A distributed denial of service, if you don't know what that is. And so I'm, first of all, just in listening mode. So I'm the representative of the Security Operations Center. I'm just kind of listening like, okay, so we're being attacked. It's impacting all of the corporate offices. This is a big deal. Okay, I'm listening. And I start hearing some things coming back out of the DDoS mitigation provider that doesn't quite make sense with my, I would say, rudimentary understanding of how DDoS is often propagate. One of them was that it was coming from 4 IP addresses. And straight away, I'm like, that sounds unusual for a DDoS. It's not the kind of indicators that I'm typically familiar with, but okay. And they're describing the tens of thousands of percentages additional traffic from these IPs. I asked them to share them. They share them in the incident channel and so on. So I start kind of doing a little bit of really basic investigation, like looking up the owners of those addresses and cross-referencing the owner information. And after about 15 minutes on this call, senior, major incident manager on there, people are getting a little heated. I ask a couple of key questions to the DDoS mitigation provider. I say, okay, first of all, I've just reviewed the playbook for enabling the scrubbing on the corporate WAN that you've started, and you're not to enable it without authorization. Did you have authorization? No. Okay, so you've automatically enabled scrubbing. Okay. Now, scrubbing is essentially, I would call, a relatively basic way of trying to filter out bad noise, bad connections with good connections. There is often significant collateral damage, and it usually means that you lose a lot of your your good connections along with the bad, because of course the bad actors don't want their connection to look bad. So they're often disguised. You lose a lot of legitimate traffic. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, scrubbing could actually be the symptom here, the cause of the symptom being poor internet access by the corporate offices. And then I look at my lookups for the IPs and cross-reference the information, and I see that these IP addresses are owned and allocated as dedicated IPs to providers of quarterly compliance training providers. That's interesting. I look in my inbox, and that organization had, within the last hour, issued their Q3 compliance training, which linked to a portal which contained many MPEG-4 videos that tens of thousands of staff had clicked on it at the same time and initiated, through no CDN, streaming from these 4 IP addresses, therefore triggering a DDoS. So everyone basically clicked on, here's how to set a good password training videos, and the DDoS mitigation provider had started scrubbing all connections, thinking they were under attack. So this resulted in the DDoS mitigation provider's contract being terminated after a few months, obviously, to hand over to somebody else, because fundamentally they had brought the business to its knees by, in some respects, DDoSing it themselves by routing all traffic without authorization through their scrubbing centers for what should have been a relatively easy to triage incident, going 4 IPs, chances of attackers, quickly leasing or getting hold of that kind of bandwidth to bring down a corporate entity is unlikely. And so, yeah, that's my short story. Anyway, so we are past our bedtime. So I want to thank all of our panelists for making the time, especially in what is an action-packed week as part of Cyber Scotland Week. Let me actually bring up my thank you slide. Otherwise, I wasted time by getting our truly talented Sophie to pull it together. So thank you very much to our panelists. It is Cyber Scotland Week. There is about 120 events going on throughout this week. If you would like to fill in their survey, that is the link. I'll also post it in the YouTube chat and post it on our Twitter. That is simply a link, not just for us, but for all events, just to give the Scottish Government and the various affiliates and partners some feedback. We've been Cyber Scotland Connects. Thank you again to everyone that shared some stories and everyone that's asked some questions. It's great to get some interaction. It's been an absolute privilege. Any closing comments from any of our panelists?
Pleasure to be involved with everyone.
It was a pleasure to be involved, indeed. And
Yep.
thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks, all.
Yeah, it was great. Let's do this again.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like to do it
Same
again. That'd be
time,
awesome.
same time next week.
Can I share a goodbye photo?
Please, Basil, show us a goodbye photo.
It's not. I just downloaded it from Twitter, but I think it's ideal.
How could that possibly go wrong? Show us. Go for it.
Can you
Brilliant.
see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. I just saw it on Twitter the other day. I just loved it.
Amazing.
Fabulous.
And that kills someone.
That's true. Inertia alone will be enough to break somebody's head.
Yep, that'll do it. And with that, all have a great evening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe out there, and we'll hope to see you next time. Thanks for your time.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
So